Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I see some new faces, but some people that were here last week, so everybody knows what I'm going to ask. Are we able to normalize the Q&A? Yes? Alhamdulillah. Okay, ready? Oh, mashallah. Is it hard? It was hard or not? It wasn't hard. Pretty nice. So, I'm like, we're going to have this first person in the time where I'm just starting to learn the book, but I'm being with the so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the Quran easy to remember, has made it easy to memorize, and easy to get remembrance from it. And a lot of us, it sounds like almost all of us experienced that this week. So that was the first actually before we do that. Let's do what was the first ayat? Can you tell me? Okay, you can just call it out. What does that mean? Let's start and you have a long minute. Let's bring down, mashallah. Beautiful. And then, what's the next one? Rather than just like everything on that one. Okay, what's that mean? Your companion has not gone astray, nor he was closely devoted. Amen? One people, and what was the meaning of that? He's not changing from himself. And he's not reading anything, I'm sure. But it's easy. You just have to, once you tell yourself you can do it, okay, I'm not going to pick on you, and then, if you are, what you have. And what was that? Yeah, it's nothing but revelation, revelation. And then, I remember who studied in Torah, and what does that mean? Teacher is very strong. Very well. Alright? Before that is one more. Good example. Before working, that's not right. Considering his strength, and then, so what does that mean? Yes, exactly. I think we're going like this. We're up high on the horizon. We're going to show that picture of the horizon. And then the last one we did that in the last week, right? Then we're going to have to develop what the mean? Leaking down cost. We said this could be many things. We said we said it could be Jibreel alayhi salam literally coming down, or it could be the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam coming down to meet us at our level, even though he's at such a elevated place. MashaAllah, everybody, what can I say? Allah SWT increase everybody's memory, and most importantly, allow us to actually get some benefit in our members with this. So it's more than just memorization. Very quickly, I want to touch on some points that we didn't quite get to last week, because last week we had the Janaza and we were kind of speaking through it a little bit. So, Surah Najm, just to kind of begin our track here, it was written in the 5th year of the Prophet. So he said it was the first surah that was the first public institution. Before that, the Quran was, people knew that there was something called that, but people would actually go out of the way to make sure nobody heard it. They would make noise, they would tell people when they came that this man Muhammad, don't listen to him. If they say something to you and then you're going to start going crazy, don't listen to him. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam never actually got a chance to say anything publicly until it was Surah Al-Najm. And we talked about how they said he was a magician, poet, soothsayer, stories, and then we also spoke about the story of Surah, where after the surah, not only the Muslims but even the non-Muslims that were there actually made sense. One thing I want to focus on, and I think this is something we're going to touch on every week, is because the way we're going through this, alhamdulillah, we're going through word by word, right? And what happens sometimes when we do that is we lose sight of the bigger picture. Every surah in the Quran is a beautiful unit within itself. It supports itself. So while we're going through it word by word, I also want us to kind of keep in mind where we are in the greater scheme of things. So Surah Al-Najm starts off. First, we think about the context. So these years, 5 years, have been spent with people attacking the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in the very beginning, the first public address, is the defense of the Prophet and the Quran. And that's something we talked about extensively last week. It comes out, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, and so forth. And this is where we are now. Even today we're going to be here. And then next week, I think we're going to go on to the next part. The next part is, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes the Prophet in the Quran is doing something that's solid, there's no doubt about it. He starts to point out the logical flaws in the religion and the actual liquidation. And after he does that, he establishes what is it really that will determine truth and falsehood. Should it just be what people think, people's whims, people's desires, or is there something greater? And then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes who is he, who are the righteous, what is actually going to happen when all this is said and done. And after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reiterate that this message is the same message that's been sent before. It's nothing new. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam brings the same message of Tawheed as Isa and alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam and Ibrahim alayhi salam and so forth. And then it ends with warning about the day of the judgment for those who reject. So if you look at it, now we're looking at it from a macroscopic point of view. It's a very well structured. Firstly, we establish it's like an argument that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing. We establish that there's no doubt in the Prophet, there's no doubt in the Quran. We point out the flaws of the other ways of life. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings matters of void because they realize that our way of life is completely wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fills that void with who is Allah, who are the righteous, what will happen. So this is the overall structure of the surah. And inshallah, as we go through, we'll point out where we are then. Another thing that was the last thing before we got started is we talked in the beginning about actually implementing. We mentioned that the Sahaba, when they used to memorize Quran, they would memorize a few ayat, like all of you did, mashallah, and then they wouldn't move on until they implemented. And I personally always kind of struggle with this because if you look at the Quran, most of the ayat aren't about halal and haram, right? So if the Quran says, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُوفٍ, don't say oof to your parents, that's very easy to implement. At least theoretically, that okay, I'll be better to my parents. But the vast majority of the ayat in the Quran aren't talking about rulings, they're talking about other things. So how do you exactly implement those ayat that aren't like a concrete action item to give you? And the way you implement that is you reflect on it. Last week we talked about the Quran says its purpose is everything, yet that's the ayat. So that's to reflect on the ayat. That's quite literally why the Quran was revealed to you. So as we go through this, as we did last week, this is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we've heard this our entire lives, but it's time that we actually learn it for ourselves, that we actually appreciate that for ourselves. And appreciation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. As we go through these ayat, I want us to imagine him. For 5 years, he tried to get this message across to people that he loved, to people that loved him for 40 years. And for 5 years, they rejected him. The people closest to him. And now he's up in this crowded place in Mecca, and he's pouring his heart out reciting the Surah. That was our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we talked about this last week. Just imagine you were there, and all of a sudden, this man comes up, like the effect that has. So when we read through these ayat of the Prophet, keep that in mind, the appreciation of the Prophet. How did this happen even get to us? How are we here studying this right now? 5 years of not being able to recite publicly. If we go through something for a couple of months, we can get to that. 5 years of not being able to recite the Quran publicly. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gets up and starts with this. One Najm in the hour. Okay, so now we continue to ayah 8. Sorry, that was, I just didn't want to start right away. That's where we ended it last week. When he drew near and came down. And then quickly we said, Umar was running, Yamma was sitting close, is when, and then that is, he came down. Okay, and then we mentioned that was Rubina Islam, and we went through our discussion. Next, after he comes down, ثم دنا فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى. فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى. He was at a distance like that of 2 bows, bows as in like a bow and arrow, joined together, أو أدنى, or even closer. So let's break this down. So that's all. What does that mean? So it's that when thereafter, okay? Kana, I don't think we did that yet. Kana, we can say he was. We think Kana is he was. So that's a very common word in the Quran. That's important to remember. Qaba, not a very common word in the Quran, means distance. So he was at a distance. Fakana Qaba. So ثم بنا فتدلى, he's coming down, and now he's at a distance. So Qaus means bow, Al-Sayni means two days. In Arabic, whenever you add that Aini, the one becomes two. So Muslim is one Muslim, Muslimani is two Muslims. And so on and so forth. So Al-Sayni means two days. Okay? So he was at a distance of two days. How? Anybody know what that means? Or, exactly. How is or? Adna. Adna, if you think about a word that you know that might sound like that is dunya, right? Because akhirah is where we want, dunya is low. It's the lower life. It comes from the same root as adna. So adna means or lesser. Okay, so he was at a distance, so saying 2 days, or adna, or lesser. Okay. So what does this mean exactly? So this kind of seems like a strange thing to say. So Jibreel alayhi salam is descending, as we mentioned last week, he was at Al-A'la, he was at the horizon, and he's coming close to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So the way to kind of think about this is we mentioned the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is a man. He is the best man who ever lived, but he is a man walking on earth. Jibreel alayhi salam is coming from the heavens. So the imagery that the Quran gives here is Jibreel alayhi salam ثم بلغ فتجلى is slowly coming down, and the Prophet Muhammad is going up, both literally and figuratively, whether you're talking about the Mi'raj or even figuratively, and then both of them are coming and meeting, فكأن الله saying Allah until they're just two those ones together. The Quran gives you that imagery of them coming together until they're dispersed. So why two those? So that seems like a strange way, to us at least, to describe the distance. The most obvious explanation is this was a standard of measurement that they used at that time. So sometimes we say 1 foot, 2 feet, that's our standard of measurement. A bow would be a standard of measurement, but it gets a little bit deeper than that. So one of the customs they had at that time is if two tribes wanted to make an alliance. If two tribes wanted to make an alliance, the leader of one tribe would come with his bow, and the leader of the other tribe would come with his bow, and they would put the two bows together. Okay, and their followers, what they would do is they would do something like a handshake, but instead of loosing hands, they would grab their forearm. So that symbolized two tribes coming together. I'll take care of you if you get attacked, you take care of me if I get attacked. So the leaders, they put their bows together, and the followers would do kind of like a modified handshake. Okay? The interesting thing is the bows would be only between the leaders. The followers wouldn't have the bows, because some of them may not just have them, they would have the handshake, the arms. So in this way, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing their difference this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reaffirming the rank of Jibreel alayhi salam and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They're coming closer, but they're concerned. They're not doing the handshake, which is for someone of a lesser rank. It's like two heads of two tribes, two presidents, but even greater than that, of course, coming together and then making an alliance. That they are on the same team. Jibreel alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's the very subtle significance of the two goals. Another opinion of this is instead of talking about Jibreel alayhi salam, this is talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's a very discussion on this that we don't have the time to get into, but it could be quite literal, and we all know the story of Isra and Mi'raj when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Prophet. But it can also be figurative, and this is the one that I want us to kind of focus on for ourselves. Because if we take a step back and look at this hadith, that many of us have heard before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever comes near to me by an ounce time, I come to him by an arm's length. Again, that arm's length. Interesting that over here is arm's length and not those. It's beautiful. And then whoever draws to me by an arm's length, I draw to him by a thousand, which is even closer. And whoever comes to me walking, I come to him running. And this is talking about all of us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about all of us. If you think about this hadith, and think about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in this context, who is going physical love in the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Who is striving and longing for Allah more than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? So this closeness, فَكَانَ قَوْبَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, the sounds right that if it's talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's talking about how figuratively close the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was. Because his longing for Allah was that great. His knowledge and his realization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was that great that it's like he was this close to Allah. Just to the next day. And the reason I want us to figure on this, to focus on this, is because this is actually, to some extent, accessible to us. If we take the interpretation of Mi'raj, of course, we are not going to experience that in our lifetime. But if we take this example, of just coming longing for Allah, running to Him, walking to Him. If we can take a look at this hadith, then in a way this ayah is actually accessible to us. We talk about that implementing, فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى. One of the ways to implement this in our lives is how much closeness do I want from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How much of that that's available to me am I actually going after? Allah tells me if I walk towards Him or run towards me, am I even doing the walking or am I just standing there? And these are questions we want to ask ourselves. The other thing is to consider the timing of this. And this is very touching because this thing in the early period as a prophet of Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we all know the story that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gets difficult. If you don't even let you for that. I mean, after that, he runs to Khadija, and there's a difference of opinion, but he gets with Muhammad or Rasulullah Mudaththir, right? And after that, there's a pause in Revelation. Many of us may know the story. And then the length of that pause, some people say it was multiple years. The majority of things is it was multiple years. But the Prophet at that time, he got very, very distressed, very sad, because this is something he wanted. And he knew this is something amazing, but then multiple years go by, and he doesn't have it. And then that's when this comes. And now not only does it come, فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى. It's almost a consolation for the Prophet. But yes, the revelation didn't come for a while, but now, فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى. Allah is this close. Or Jibreel alayhi salam is this close. So now we are this close. It's a consolation for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Another way to kind of understand this is the heaviness of revelation. Again, to appreciate the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam more. We know the story when the first revelation happened, Jibreel alayhi salam comes and hugs him. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, like I thought he would squeeze the life out of me. إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. We're going to give you a very heavy load, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. So the process of revelation in itself was physically very hard on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It was physically very hard. So this represents, as we said, it's a very early on still in the mission. So if Jibreel alayhi salam was very close to him, making physical contact, it would have been very tough for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So if كان قاب قوسين أو أدنى, some distance is still maintained. The beautiful thing is we get still getting used to the presence of Jibreel alayhi salam. The beautiful thing about this is if you look at the end of the mission, there's a very famous hadith Jibreel where Jibreel alayhi salam comes and says, teach me about Islam, teach me about Iman. Everybody knows that hadith? That hadith of mother, he fell and his knees were touching the Prophet's knees. So it started off as فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, and then over the 13-year mission, they get closer and closer. And that last hadith, when you're summarizing the whole religion, that's where they mean their country. Because now our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam doesn't used to it now. He used to do it alayhi salam. He's been with for 13 years, and now they're this close. They're not here, it's not 2 hours anymore, they're talking to each other. They're here. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay, one final question on this ayah. لا يغني قاب قوسين لا add the al-adna, not even closer. It's not because it rhymes or where it's beautiful. Many reasons, just one, so we can move on, is no one can say that this is figurative. So I can say, if I say to somebody, I was so close I could almost touch him. I may be being figurative, and I may not have been that close. So to take that possibility out, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, al-adna. So before you think it's figurative, let me tell you, if anything, it was even closer than that. It wasn't just the 2 bows. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we had something like this last week as well, where he adds something to take away any figurative interpretation, like, no, he was actually this close to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Moving on, فَأَوْحَى إِلَىٰ عَبْدِهِ مَا أَوْحَى. So a lot of familiar words there. فَأَوْحَى إِلَىٰ عَبْدِهِ مَا أَوْحَى. So after he comes that close, he revealed to his slave what he revealed. So far, there should be something needed up. So, أوحى. So أوحى, yes, anybody remember? So we didn't do this exactly, but we did إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. Awha comes from the same root. It means he revealed. Right? So Wahy means revelation. Awha means he revealed. Ila means to. Okay? So he revealed to. Awha, ila. Abdihi. Abd means slave. Abdihi means his slave. So he revealed to his slave. Ma. So last week we talked about ma is a negation. Over here, ma is not a negation. So ma is multiple types. Over here, it means what? Okay. So he revealed to his slave ma what? Awha. So So he revealed to his slave what he revealed. So whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, that's what he revealed. So let's break this down again. That's to reveal to his slave what he revealed. So this can be understood as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealing through Jibreel alayhi salam to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam what he revealed. So what did he reveal here exactly? So there's multiple opinions on this. One of the most beautiful, as I was reading through this is actually Surah Al-Duha. So again, going back to the context, it was that first revelation. Then that period where there's no revelation and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam starts getting distressed, it starts affecting him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Jibreel alayhi salam comes, and he comes this close. فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَىٰ. And what did he say? وَالضُّحَىٰ وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَىٰ مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَىٰ. Your Lord hasn't left you. He hasn't left you. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَىٰ. Weren't you an orphan and we took care of you? And then all the way up to the tafsir says, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرًا. So أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرًا. So Jibreel alayhi salam is coming this close to him. After all that time there was no revelation. And not only is he physically close, he's reassuring him. But didn't we take care of you already? وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَىٰ. We guided you. أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرًا. Didn't we expand your chest? So one opinion, and one of the most beautiful ones, at least I think, is that interpretation. And then there's some other hadith that say there's specific things that are said to the Prophet, and of course, all of these can be true. All of these could have been what was revealed. But this specific narration, the Jibreel alayhi salam comes close and says, paradise has been forbidden. Paradise has been made haram to all the other prophets until you enter it, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then he says, and this is for us, it's almost, it's almost even supposed to say that Jannah has been forbidden to every nation until your nation enters it. And that's us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us deserving of that. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Another opinion is in the Salah. So the same Salah that we put off to the last second, the same Salah we speak through, the same Salah that we neglect. So another opinion that this Salah is what was revealed. Not the, the 5 days Salah, that comes from the Mi'raj, but in the beginning of prophethood, whatever form of Salah we had then, so that it was done. And the last opinion is it was something to make him even more certain that it was just a revelation and he wasn't going insane or he wasn't affected by anything, something to make him, something personal for the Prophet. So someone to know that this is coming from Allah and nobody else. Continuing, مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادُ مَا رَأَىٰ. مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادُ مَا رَأَىٰ. The heart did not err in what he saw. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So his heart didn't deceive him in whatever it was that he saw. So this is like the one we did last week. So negation, yeah. So no negation. Kadaba, and this is how I know, is to tell a lie. So anything that comes after the lie is going to be negated. So kadaba actually means he lies. It's a verb. So it's just he lies. Now kadaba al-fu'ad. Fu'ad is a word for heart. So his heart didn't lie. Now kadaba al-fu'ad. Ma again is what? So in this ayah we have both kinds of ma. One is the ma of negation, and then the second ma again means what? And the ra'a means he said. So his heart didn't lie in what he said. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay. So in Arabic, and this was probably noticed, the heart is the center of aql. And aql is very often translated as intelligence. But it's actually not just intelligence. In Arabic, aql is what separates us from every single other animal. So we can call it consciousness, we can call it morality, whatever you want to call it. Aql is what separates man from beast. And the heart in our creation is the center of this aql, right? So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in what he saw, whether it was Jibreel alayhi salam or whether you're talking about the Mi'raj, his heart didn't lie to him. His aql didn't lie to him in what he saw. This is not insanity, this is not a dream. This is completely real, what he was saying. So who did he see exactly? So one has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one opinion. And in that case, it says, because of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above, anything that we can imagine, that seeing can't be with the eyes, it's from the heart. So that's why let's not think about the eye. It specifies that his heart didn't lie in what he said. And again, that seeing with the heart goes back to that closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That closeness that is not necessarily only reserved for prophets, not to that degree, of course, but if you seek that, if you seek that person with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's also available to me and you. Because that heart of yours can also see. Okay, so that's one interpretation. So your heart in a way affirms what the senses can't comprehend. So this is something that the eyes can't comprehend, the ears, and the mind, the senses, so is hard to comprehend. Like I said, the other, and the other opinion is that it was the breathing of the Salah. أفتمارونه على ما يرى أفتمارونه على ما يرى. Are you going to dispute him over what he saw? So now it's turning the direction, it's turning the conversation to the Mushrik of Makkah. Again, don't forget, as a kid, imagine that this is the Prophet is up in that marketplace, that crowded place, and he's reciting this to everybody. And they're listening to this. So they report about one of my young people, they said, oh my God, everything we said about this guy is being disproven one by one. And then now that their attention is completely trapped, and then now he's saying that he saw he saw possibly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're thinking that how can this be possible? And he said, are you going to dispute with him in what he saw? So as these questions are popping up into their mind, and they're seeing this man reciting, every question they have, the next ayah comes, addressing exactly that. So, the alif, the hamza at the beginning, in many places in the Quran, that's a question mark. So it's, if you have that hamza in the beginning, Allah, right, is there any God other than Allah? So the alif is a question mark. That is so, we know already. Tumarunahu is you dispute him. It's not a very common word in the Quran. So do you dispute him? Ala, it can mean upon, it can mean over, it can mean about. In this case, it's over or about. Ala ma, and again, this is going to be what? We did it. And yara is the same. So are you going to dispute with him about what he said? The reason it's phrased this way is because you are the ones, the Mushrikeen of Makkah, you are the ones that said that he is underneath for 30 years. You are the ones that said that he doesn't tell a lie, right? You never saw this. You didn't see it. You didn't see Allah first. But now you're arguing with him about something that he saw and you didn't. So how does that make any sense? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting the whole argument back to them. So it's like, in order to see it, it's like a blindfolded person arguing with somebody that thinks about something that he saw. It doesn't make any sense. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing out the flaw. Another thing is, every single thing that came before this, they were disputing about. He brings Quran, they say this is closer. He says to do one thing, they say no, he's just going after permission, he's going after this, he's going after that. We have a problem with everything that he brings, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, are you just going to add another thing to the list? Anything he brings, you seem to have a problem with. Is this just going to be another thing that you're adding to the list? And we all know the story with Isra and Mi'raj. They asked him, describe Al-Aqsa to us. How many windows are there? Tell us about this paradigm. With endless questions just to undermine him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking them, is this all the is for you? You're just adding another one to the list. And another whole thing here is it's even talking to the believers. Because even with the believers, sometimes we may hear something, or we may read something about the religion that doesn't, it doesn't cause us doubt in the religion, but it may make us think of the religion. Okay? It doesn't cause us doubt in our faith, or Allah, but it may make us think of him. But that sounds kind of weird, right? That even happened to the Sahaba. And after Mi'raj, some people were like, that does sound a little bit strange. Because some of that is just being human, not all of us are like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and that's why he was called as some of us may take that little extra time. So this ayah is even talking to the believer that reads this. Or maybe some of us, when I said that one of the things we might have seen, one of the beings we might have seen was Allah. Maybe some of us, when I said that, or even you, when I read that, maybe I thought like, wow, that seems kind of strange. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to me. Allah is talking to you, the believer. But are you going to be disputing about this? I'm going to this. So if you feel something in yourself that this seems a little bit strange, well, Allah is telling you, but don't argue about this. I'm telling you that this is true. So it puts the Mushrikun in their place, of course, but it also reaffirms us that who is this message coming from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the word of Allah. And then to even reinforce it, that if you're having doubt, the important ones, if you're having doubt whether it's Jibreel alayhi salam or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you're having doubt that he saw him once, وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ نَزْلَةً أُخْرَى. He actually saw him twice. Indeed, he saw him another time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely unapologetic. He's just honoring it in. Like, no, this happened. Not only did it happen once, it actually happened twice. وَلَقَدْ. So, what is and? So, la here is called lam al-tawkid. It's used for emphasis. So, it means indeed. Qad here is also indeed. So, how many indeeds are there? Two, right? So even if you said, well, he doesn't like an Isra, it means this him another time. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, that's enough for Allah. Even if he said, قَدْ رَآهُ نَزْلَةً أُخْرَى, it would mean indeed he saw him another time. That would be enough for Allah. When instead Allah says, وَلَا قَدْ رَآهُ نَزْلَةً أُخْرَى, two letters of emphasis. That he definitely saw him another time. No room for doubt in this ayah. رَآهُ, he said, يَرَى means he saw, يَرَى means he sees, rather. رَآهُ means he saw. رَآهُ means he saw him. Nazlatan means, it literally means a descent, but in this context, you can say he saw him another time, another descent, and Isra just means other. And indeed, my mother. Of course, the translation, we're not going to translate it, and indeed, we saw him. But when you look at the Arabic, there's multiple levels of emphasis here. A lot of us probably hear, like Aflaqa right? We hear that usually on Friday. That's one level, right? Or Aflaqa al-Mu'minun. Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says over and over, but he saw him another time. So you think you forgot about him seeing him once? He's on him twice. If you see, so this is talking about someone who came down, Jibreel alayhi salam, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saw him there. So what subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying is, if you think that him seeing Jibreel alayhi salam on earth is something to that, وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ نَزْلَةً أُخْرَى, he saw him another time in heaven. So actually something even more amazing, he actually saw him in heaven. So once on earth and once in heaven, as we know in Islam and Mi'raj. So completely unapologetic. And that's something for us to take from it as well as far as implementation. When it comes to our religion, we have to be this unapologetic. It doesn't matter what's going to sound good to people, what people are going to think of us. We have the word of Allah. This is literally the word of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to us. And there is no room for us to be apologetic about any of it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people like that. And then this descent, Nazlatan, could also mean coming close. And then in that figurative meaning that we said earlier, it can be the, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the last third of the night becomes close, right? He does that Yazoo. He comes down to ask, who's going to ask for forgiveness so I can forgive him? And again, that last third of the night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming down and asking, that's not just for the prophet. That's for me and you. We have access to some degree of this. The question is, are we actually going to take advantage of that? Are we actually going to read this ayah and say, wow, these are some facts? Or are we going to read this ayah and say, some part of this is actually available to me? And I can actually chase after that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of that. عند سدرة المنتهى. Where did he see him? عند سدرة المنتهى. So by, so عند, it can mean with, it can mean by, in this case it means by, and near. Surah al-Muntaha is the name of a tree, we're going to it, a low tree. I don't know what a low tree is, I don't know if any of us know, but we'll go into it. And Muntaha means the last boundary. So in the low tree, that's in that last boundary. Okay. So this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he saw him the other time. So where he saw Jibreel, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the other time. This is what we're talking about. Islam and Flash. And over here, there's no difference of opinion. And Allah, and the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, tells us himself, I was speaking to him, listening to his favorite supporting him there. And this is, you can read the description, but it's like beyond imagination. Its leaves are like the ears of elephants, the fruits are like large jars, and no one amongst Allah's creation is able to describe its beauty. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us see it in that. And in another narration, a rider could travel in the shade, one of his branches for 100 years, 100 riders per shade beneath it. And it goes on and on. Just a marvelous creation of life. And as he said to Allah, no one's going to be able to describe it. So going through it is we can imagine it, but we'll never fully be able to. But why is the broken moon to have? Why at the last border? So, different opinions on this. Muntaha, it literally means where something ends. So what if you use this callback and of that tree, all our knowledge ends there. Anything beyond there is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah alone. So that's the tree of the ending. Another opinion, and again all of these can be correct, is where all our deeds go. All the destination, so the end journey of our deeds. Any good that you do will get taken up to the angels and they're deposited there. That's the end of the journey for your deeds. The other one is the destination of the souls of the Shuhada. The souls of the Shuhada all around the world. When you think about our brothers and sisters in Gaza and everywhere else, that's the destination for their souls. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on them. And another more general is a destination for all of us, our followers of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the followers of Sunnah. But if you take that extra step to follow the Sunnah, then that's your destination. It's beautiful. One thing to, actually we'll get that after we finish this off. This is the last one. عندها جنة المأوى. So near the Surah Al-Muntaha where it is another thing called جنة المأوى, the garden of the resting. So عندها means what? By with, right? Her just means her. But remember last week you said in Arabic, there's no, everything has to be a he or a she. So Jannah is going to be her. So Indaha means with, near it. Jannah, everything means, is garden. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all Jannah. And Al-Ma'wa. Ma'wa means a resting place, a retreat, somewhere where you go to relax. Indaha, Jannah al-Ma'wa. So as we think about this, these are all great things to talk about. عند سدرة المنتهى عندها جنة المأوى. Very abstract things, trees with leaves like elephant's ears. But practically, what does this really do for us? Now think about who this is being revealed to. From that place where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is standing and reciting this, and that gathering, it's not just Muslims. It's also Muslims, it's also Bilal, it's also Haddad, it's also people that have been getting tortured physically every single day for 5 years for believing in this. People that saw people like Ammar and Sumayya, radiallahu anhum, the people that saw them get killed for saying La ilaha illallah. It's people that saw that. It's people that after 5 years there was only a couple of dozen of them, and they couldn't see where this was going, but they still believed. And these people are being told, in the Sidrat al-Muntaha, that no, there's a tree called Sidrat al-Muntaha. And, Ammar and Sumayya that were martyred, that's where their souls are. So, you're going through so much hardship right now, but in the Sidrat al-Muntaha, there's a tree that's there. It's in a place called Jannat al-Ma'wa, the garden of restfulness. So you're going through all this hardship, you're going through all this suffering now, but there you can find rest. The Sahaba are also doing this. So the Muslims are hearing this, and they're becoming amazed. But the Sahaba are also at that same place, and they're hearing this, and this gives them hope that this is different. And if we're going through anything, of course, our difficulties will be there, but everybody has their difficulties that Allah gives. This is for us. But there is a place, there is a Sidrat. There is a Jannat al-Ma'wa. If you're going through something in your life, there is a place where it does come and you can get some rest. Jannat al-Ma'wa. Where it all ends and you can finally get some rest. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that. So, we spoke about all this, and the beautiful thing is, one of the difficulties you mentioned that this is right on the right side of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jannat al-Ma'wa. So think about all the all the people that have suffered so much, and they finally get there. And they're given Jannat al-Ma'wa, the garden of restfulness. Finally rest, and where are you resting? On the right of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What more can you give us? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those people. And just pretty much to end on, so the good Surah is the virtue. I don't know what it was, so I looked it up, and this is actually from one of the Arabic dictionaries, that the three qualities that make it different than other trees. One is its sense of shape, delicious fruit, and a pleasant fragrance. And all of that, so this specific tree is virtue because that's all the qualities of that place. The best that we can understand it. Its sense of shape, where you can rest forever. Delicious fruit that you can eat from forever. And a pleasant fragrance as soon as you get there. And you get to smell that forever. And for the Shuhada, they're already smelling it. Right? For those that are followed and down upon the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that's the destination. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us like that. That's it for this week. We got 3 hours. فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى. So he was 2 golden away or even closer. فأوحى إلى عبده ما أوحى. And then he revealed his slave what he revealed. ما تغضب الفؤاد ما رأى. His heart did not deceive him in what he saw. أفتمارونه على ما يرى. Are you going to deceive him over what he saw? ولقد رآه نزلة أخرى. And you will find him another time عند سدرة المنتهى. Near سدرة المنتهى عندها جنة المأوى. And near there is the garden of eternal restfulness. These are the sources Really share this every week, but these are the fact to prepare that all of this is based on. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وإن شاء الله في بداية نفسه. We're going to make a website, inshallah. This is the way to do that. Can you take those numbers or? Okay. So what I do is the PowerPoint, I'll post it on the website group. I will make a website group and stuff, and then you guys can look at the PowerPoint and go to it, and then also throughout the week if you have any questions or anything, we can talk to them. That will be beneficial.